to Mongolia Matters. My name is Sylvia Leftin Sweeney, and I am your host today, and I will be talking about Mongolia Matters. I had the privilege of being in Mongolia serving in an NGO, that would be a non-governmental organization, for a span of 10 years. And my subject was English, and Mongolians desperately want to learn English. So it was my privilege to come to know Mongolians very well, and I found out that they're a country that really loves Americans. They love their own country too, which is a third world country which is rapidly developing. And I think the last figure I read was like 60% of the people are under 35, something along those lines. It's a very, 60% of the people are, well, yes, under 35, a very young population. And they all just desperately want to get good jobs, just like our people, and be employable and hireable. So, of course, English is very important because that's the language of the internet. Well, the subject that I chose to talk about today is actually Mongolian folk art. The reason I've decided that that would be a good first show is because, first of all, of course, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And secondly, you really get a slice of Mongolian life by seeing the art that is done by the artists in the land. And just a little aside, I got to know the artists quite well, and the artists got to know me quite well because I really enjoyed buying Mongolian art. Now, I started out with just knowing about these absolutely delightful little note cards, and they put an amazing amount of detail, and they use gorgeous color, and they sell them for whatever they can get because they're wanting to make money in order to eat. So I used to send these to people who were so kind to help support me to go over to Mongolia, because I didn't get paid by the schools that I taught in because they just couldn't afford a person like myself to go over and get paid. So I went as a volunteer, and oftentimes the people were very delighted to sell me whatever I would buy. So they would even come to my door. They found out where I lived. It was fun. But without any more on that particular picture, just to give you an idea of what my first introduction to Mongolian art was, which was on the street as I would encounter the local artists. Now, I'm going to start at this part of my living room, which I call my Mongolia room. And I would like to show you this piece of furniture. Actually, there are two pieces of furniture, one on top of the other. These are called avdars. Now, I could have gone out and bought brand spanking new avdars, but I actually brought the ones that I had in the country. So they're not perfect according to maybe somebody else's standards, but they mean a lot to me because they were my real furniture. And this is a typical type of furniture that you would find in what we call a Mongolian ger, which ger means home. And the people also made this little ger. This is real felt, and then they live in round felt tents. About 40% of the population still lives in these round felt tents. And I'll just give you a small introduction to, this is broken now, but you can see that they have this skylight type of thing. And then that's the only thing that really lets the light in most of the time. And then, even though this has become a bit sparse because people like to touch it, but this is a typical Mongolian bed. And that is like what we would call a day bed, of course, here. And the only thing is, they don't seem to have like Serta Perfect sleepers and Tempur-Pedic mattresses. They have a piece of wood with a pad. So it's a bit to get used to, but people in Mongolia sleep on them all the time. And then, of course, they have this is an avdar, just like one of the avdars that I have here on that idea. And they would be apt to put a picture of perhaps a Buddha or perhaps a loved one. And that would be how that goes. Mongolian gers, which ger means home, are always facing south. Of course, for obvious reasons, the climate, the north wind would just be too brutal, and it is quite a severe continental climate. So they always face them south. Now, what's very interesting about the designs on these is that each one of them called a hay, by the way. We would call in, I think in Pennsylvania, they would call them hex signs, and ours are called just, well, whatever we call them, I guess. But these are Mongolian designs. This one is called the hammer hay. Hammer means nose, and this is designed after the inside nostril of a cow. And, you know, that's a slice of Mongolian culture right there. There are more animals than people in Mongolia. And a lot of their art, as you will see as we go around the room, is based on agriculture animals in particular. Okay, so there's your hammer hay. And this one is really interesting. And this is called an ultsi. And, of course, this has no beginning and no end, except that mine is a little open there. Theirs wouldn't be. I had this one designed, actually. This isn't the Mongolian design. They would have kept it on its side. But I wanted one with shelves in it because I knew I wanted to bring it to America and use it in this way. This one is more of the typical, the one on the bottom, the typical Mongolian design where they have it going left to right rather than standing upright. And there is your ultsi right there, and of course your hammer hay right there. And around the edge we have what is called the altan hay. Alt means gold, so altan hay, of course that is a gold border. So that is that subject, if you will. Okay, now let's go over to this other set of avdas, and I would just like to give you a little snippet of Mongolian culture to say, when I, in my Mongolian apartment, had two avdas, actually it was this bottom one and that bottom one, and I had one on top of the other. One of my Mongolian students was totally, really horrified that I would do anything like that, because Mongolians don't put avda upon avda. You just don't do it. So I had a sort of a sensitivity after a while that I better take them and put them in it the way that they're used to so I wouldn't upset them. But of course I'm in America now, and so to conserve space I've used my vertical space. Okay, so talking about the ultsi, this is a herdsman's hat. And this herdsman's hat, as you'll notice, has a knot on top pointing to heaven. Their sky, which is blue, of course, is called tinger, which means heaven. And their hats most often have some kind of a knob on top facing heaven. And as you can see, here's the ultsi, the no beginning and no end. It's on pocketbooks, it's on wallets, it's on jewelry. This beautiful design is on many, many things, which is interesting. And then a little snippet of Mongolian culture talking about hats. When you are taking your hat off in Mongolia, you would never turn it upside down, because their belief is that if you turn it upside down, the spirit of the person, which has been going into the hat from the head, would escape. So they just don't do that. So they would be very careful to place their hat like that so that the spirit will stay in. And then I would like to point out this horse, which was given to me by a Mongolian student. Actually, he was my only herdsman, male herdsman that really was like a pretty full-time herdsman. And when I was leaving the town called Bulgan, he gave me that as a gift. And he was a racer, a horse racer. And during their summers, actually it's July 11th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, when is the sports celebration. And that's called Nadam. So just a little snippet of the kinds of celebrations that you'll encounter should you ever go to Mongolia, and I hope you can. It is most delightful, and it is my heartthrob. Okay, so now we'll move around, and I would like to point out a few things in this wall hanging. Mongolians tend to have wall hangings on their walls. Of course, that would keep the heat in. And they have in the, there's a couple of kind of buildings that you would find in the countryside. One is a ger, which of course you already know because we've talked about it. But then the other one is called a baishan, and that's a wooden structure which is very basic. I guess that's how I would describe it. Very, very basic. But the interesting thing is that they build into that a heat wall so that the heat is behind the plastered wall or whatever the material is they use. And then they put carpets around other walls that might not be right where the heat is, just to keep the warmth in, because temperatures in Mongolia, being a continental climate, can go anywhere from regular normal temperatures, which we would think are normal, to sub-freezing. 30, 40 degrees below zero is not unusual. And like New England, though, they have changes and fluctuations, so some days you might have a temperature that's warm and nice like we do today, and the next day it's down below zero. But actually, when I was asked where I would like to serve after I was interviewed by my first NGO, I said, well, I know I'd like to go where I'm needed the most, but I'll tell you, I'd rather be cold than hot. I got my wish, and actually I'm delighted about that. Well, I'd like to show you this painting, which I haven't put up yet, but this is a very, very typical, well-known, actually famous painting. It's done by an artist named Shadov, and Shadov was a very realistic painter. He put whatever happens in life is in these kinds of paintings called A Day in the Life. And it's a very common picture for people that are visiting Mongolia to come home with, and I am no exception. I did buy this from one of those artists that came to my door, and I really love it. You'll notice a lot of use of orange. Even in the beautiful gear, the round felt tent, they have possibly an orange floor, but definitely a set of slats or spokes. I think of it as like spokes in a wheel, or perhaps a bike would be a better way to describe it. And they're about an inch or so wide, and each one of those can be decorated very exquisitely with lovely Mongolian designs. So I think that's about all I'll say about my wonderful day in the life of a Mongolian. And we will go next to my absolutely favorite thing, which is right down here. And that is called a dung basket. And it was used to pick up the droppings, if you will, of camels, horses, cows, if there are any out there. And you'll notice that I've got a few little light things here because I've Americanized my dung basket. But I want to give you an idea of how this is used. And I probably won't exactly do it, but the woman, and it's usually a woman, takes this basket and she actually puts it on her back. And then they have shoulder straps, just, you know, makeshift things. And they actually walk around the desert or the steppe, which would be the green grassy plain, with this thing on their back, and they have like a pitchfork kind of thing made of wood, and they actually go like that, and they stab the dung and flip it into their basket. So that's my sort of treasure, if you will. And just because I love lights, I don't know if this will do it, but I've made myself a little, I guess it's not going to stay, but that's what I did. So maybe I'll put my Christmas tree in there. Okay, oh, by the way, I don't think I mentioned that this white mountain is actually called Tsagan Tolgoi. Tsagan means white, and Tolgoi means head. So this is Whitehead Mountain, just like we would say the White Mountains perhaps in New Hampshire, and everybody knows this. When I had this in my home in Mongolia, my students would come in and say, oh yes, Tsagan Tolgoi. And of course, as you see, we have the horses, more animals than people in Mongolia, and they're just out. Look at how they just freely roam. You can be sitting down at a picnic, and all of a sudden, a whole herd of horses just stops by, takes a drink, and moves on. It's wonderful. All right, the next thing I'd like to show you is my Kazakh embroidery. I have several pieces of this. This, of course, is a pillow case. And Kazakhs are known for their embroidery. Isn't it just gorgeous? And something that's really wonderful, I think, is that there are several people who have gone over in one of my organizations that I served with just to develop the women's, or mostly women do this embroidery, of course, but doesn't have to be, but it tends to be. Those women need a job, and here they have this magnificent gift. And so some of the NGO volunteers went specifically into the very deep countryside where these Kazakh people live in order to help them make something saleable out of their craft. And there's actually a website, perhaps we'll put it on later, where you can send and get some of the wonderful materials such as this, or items, if you will. So there's the Kazakh. And by the way, I was in one place, it was called Nalik in Mongolia, and that was a suburb about 29 kilometers southeast of Ulaanbaatar. And there was a Kazakh community there as well. The reason being they were very expert people in the coal mines. So they actually imported them. I'm not so sure they had a choice, but maybe they did. But they were brought to Nalik in order to make the coal mines go. Right now, those coal mines are in terrible disrepair, and lots of bad things happen, explosions, child labor. That's being worked on. They're working on many issues, but just to sort of give you a little slice of life again of Mongolia and what's happening, and they're going forward, of course. All right, the next thing I'd like to show you is this painting over here. And this is such a very indicative Mongolian treasure, if you will. Not because it's necessarily made from a famous artist, but it is a typical scene called, I call it Moving Day in Mongolia. Now, people, as you know, live in those round felt tents, and they have carpets. This might be a carpet for the floor. And then they have the dung basket. There's the dung basket. And of course, looks like they might have had a couple. And all of what they own is put on a camel or two, as you can see from the many legs, that actually there's more than one camel there, and they bring it to a better grazing ground once the first grazing ground has become depleted. And just a little funny aside, I had a student living with me for about 6 months, and she looked at it, she said, Baksha, that means my teacher. And he didn't hold, right? How many legs? So I look, and I count, and I think there's like maybe 9 or 10 legs there. So I think the artist, he came to my door specifically to sell me this painting. I don't know if anybody else would buy it, but I love it. And that's Moving Day in Mongolia. Okay, I guess an important thing would be for me to just show you this, not because it's so different, but because they don't do round, what do you call, lazy Susans as a rule in Mongolia. But IKEA came into Mongolia, and I just love IKEA. And so I bought this from an IKEA store, and I brought it to what they call the black market, which is not an underground market. It's just a place where goods are out on tables, and you can buy many, many things, one of which is gear furniture. Now, gear furniture, of course, you're looking, actually, you would not find exactly this because I had this painted. I went to the black market and brought this to be painted by one of the painters, and they were very gracious to do it for me, so I sort of invented that one. And then this, at the black market, were chairs that were unpainted. So I bought the chair. I might have paid probably 8,000 tugrits, which would be about, at that time, maybe $7. Today, the dollar has gone to a very unfavorable level, and the exchange rate is sadly, they are in inflation mode, and they're not getting much for their tugrit. But this I brought to the black market and had them paint for me. So I have chairs with backs. The typical chair in a Mongolian gear, of course, would be a stool. And I do love those stools. Someday maybe I'll have one. All right, now I'd like to bring you to a little more poignant kind of story, which is also a slice of Mongolian life. And I'd like to preface it by saying that this isn't a criticism of the culture. As a matter of fact, I worked for 21 years for the Department of Mental, at the time it was called Mental Retardation, and Department of Mental Health at Hogan Regional and also the John T. Berry Rehab Center. And we saw a movie called Titicut Follies, and it showed what the situation was years ago with the treatment of special needs people in America. And of course it was deplorable, and things have changed greatly since then. Well, Mongolia being a third world country and maybe 50 years behind us in many ways, maybe not so much now, but definitely then, had what was called a, well, I call it an asylum. I guess it was their mental hospital. It was just the most sad place to be in because, of course, light bulbs were hanging off of wires just with no light, and windows were boarded up, and it was not terribly warm in there, and just men and women milling around, all nothing to do and nowhere to go. It was pretty sad. But, do you know, I discovered the resilience of the human spirit and that message of hope that I think is implanted deep within the breast. And that was exemplified by a woman I met there named Nara. Nara, who I think is right here in this painting, I believe this is a self-portrait of Nara, was a Mongolian who had been put into the institution for whatever reason. Sometimes it was just because new husbands didn't want the old husband's child. So for whatever reason, she ended up there, and she wanted to know if I'd like to see her paintings. So I said, oh, of course. And I went down there, by the way, with Sister Nellie and a Buddhist nun and myself. So you had a Christian, Buddhist, and a Catholic nun going down to do what we could to help. But anyway, Nada showed me the most magnificent drawings all over the walls of sun, maybe bursts, and happy faces and Disney characters. And so even though she was in this pit, she was able to think of happy thoughts. Sadly, the last time I saw Nada, I brought some curds, which is a typical Mongolian food that they love, and Sister Nellie bought many clothes, and we just did what we could to do a little program for them to show them fun things you can do without spending money, of course, and the basic things. But anyway, without going into detail, that was the last time I saw Nada because she died of tuberculosis. And now for my last art piece, I would like to share with you that this is not actually taken directly from Mongolia. As a matter of fact, I was at, I think it was Bed Bath & Beyond, and lo and behold, I saw this magnificent, to me magnificent, horse. As you'll notice, it's a very colorful horse, and not terribly realistic in that it is a very colorful horse, but it reminded me of a horse that I had seen by a famous artist in a restaurant in Mongolia called Millie's Restaurant, where a lot of American food is served, so you get an awful lot of expats there. But anyway, this horse is was made in China, and there's a part of China just at the border between Mongolia and China that's called, like Mongolians call it Mongol China, which is actually Inner Mongolia. And so, of course, they would know that Mongolians love horses. So I would be not surprised that this painting, which was done in China, could have been made by maybe a China Mongol, if you will. But the one in Mongolia that I just loved was a cubist type of painting, and it was all reds and oranges, and it was stunning. So to me, this is also stunning, and I really enjoy it. Thank you. And now for our last little piece of Mongolian life, a snippet about the school that I last taught at. That was called the Unitov School, which means Intelligence Center, and it was a really amazingly well-run private school. And so when I left Mongolia, I actually left there quite sick with some respiratory infection from the pollution, I really promised and purposed in my heart that I would try to raise some funds for the Unitov School. And so this will be posted at the end of my show, and you will see if you're so led to send a donation in, that would be lovely. And that is what I wanted to say about that. Thank you for listening to Mongolia Matters.